Brilliant. So thank you to Jaki and Steve for joining us today. We're going to be discussing what NHS hiring managers want from their tech contractors. So my name's Bernadette. I'm the MD for Evolution's NHS business. We're joined today by Jaki Allen Free and Steve Parker. So Jaki, if I just give you a moment to introduce yourself and the role that you do within the NHS.
Yeah, so as you said, Jaki Allen Free, worked in the NHS for a number of years, been contracting for more years than I care to remember. And what I've done in terms of the NHS is activities such as paper free, EPRs, the GDE programme, predominantly in the Cheshire and Merseyside, but latterly in the last few years, quite national roles as well, working with NHS England, the ICSs, etc. Programme roles, so recruiting substantive staff as well as contractors, and just getting in and getting projects done for the NHS.
I think you've got a great position because you've been both a contractor yourself as well as hiring contractors. So I think your standpoint is that you can see both sides of the coin, which will be really interesting to explore in a moment. And Steve, would you be able to introduce yourself?
Yeah, so I'm Steve Parker. I'm the Associate Director of IT for Informatics Merseyside. So I've been in the NHS now since about 2003, I think it is. So I've been in the NHS a long time. So it did originally come from the public sector and then came across, from the private sector into the public sector. So in terms of my experience, I did start on a service desk, and then when I first came into the NHS, went across into desktop support, and then worked through a number of service delivery roles to actually come to where I am within the organisation now. So it's given me that kind of broad spread in terms of service delivery, technical roles, kind of understanding, where people come from particular kind of jobs. But yeah, it was quite good that I had, although very, short kind of periods in the private sector, that I have worked across kind of both industries as well. So that's me in a nutshell.
It's given you probably really valuable experience and insight. And what's important is that both of you regularly hire. And so we can share some of that insight today with the audience. So Steve, I'm going to start with you if I could pose the first question to you. So what skills and experiences do you look for when you're hiring a tech contractor?
Okay, so I mean, obviously it's always useful if that individual has had some NHS skills, but that isn't, to say that is the big end. And if you haven't had NHS skills, that's not the end of it. We're more than happy to take people on that haven't had any NHS previous skills. Obviously, we'd like them to be technical, but then from a technical perspective, I always believe that you can teach technical skills. So within our organisation, culture is a massive one. So I like to feel that we've built a great culture over the years. So in terms of those roles, we do find that the softer skills more important. So when I'm talking about softer skills, it's things like communication, time management, self-discipline, and things like self-discipline and focus. That's especially been quite important during the COVID years as well. So we've gone from an organisation where people were in an office, 9 till 5 every day, where the majority of our workforce now is at home. We are starting to come back into the office a bit more, but I found it quite challenging to be able to concentrate and work from home when I first started doing it. I personally didn't like it, but then as the time went by, you do enjoy that kind of flexibility, etc. So being able to have that kind of self-discipline and focus, that they're kind of really key from our perspective. But communication is a massive one. So technical people have to, especially in the NHS, they have to be able to communicate on a multitude of levels. They are having to speak to doctors, nurses on a daily basis, and being able to put problems or solve issues in a manner that they can kind of understand as well. So that's especially apparent on our service desk, because it is a very technical role on the service desk. But as I say, when we're actually interviewing people and bringing people in from that, it is the softer skills that we really do kind of hone in on. If that individual hasn't got good communication skills, they might be the best technical person in the world, but it's very unlikely that we'll take them on, because that communication element is so important. being able to do that both verbal and written as well. So it is a really important skill that I would say. Like I say, technical skills, you can teach those, but in terms of that communication piece, it's very difficult. And other things that I kind of find, as a softer skill that I find important, things like passion. So I think coming into the NHS, it is a difficult place to be, place to work, but it's also very rewarding. So if you're very passionate about your job and you come in and you want to do it and you enjoy it, it makes the time go a lot faster. Because at the end of the day, you spend an awful amount of your life being in work. So if you're coming into the workplace and not enjoying it, for the start, you're not in the right job for doing that. You've got to have that passion in terms of what you do. Otherwise, it's not worth you actually working within the organisation. And as I say, within IM, culture has been massive. We've worked really hard in terms of having a great culture within the organisation. And I feel that we've got to that where what we do see within the organisation is once people come in, they don't sit stagnant in the job. They will tend to move on within the organisation, but we do see a great retention in terms of people staying. So that's something that I think, when we're looking at those softer skills, that's important because we want to make sure that that individual sits and fits with the culture of the organisation, because what you don't want to do is bring in a bad apple that's then going to upset the apple cart. So, yeah, like I say, it's the softer skills from my perspective that they're kind of the more important things.
And I think people might be sort of pleasantly surprised that it's not sort of a tech list of these are the skill sets sort of on a technical basis. Of course, whichever technical role is being recruited for, you need to have a certain level of experience. But it's interesting that you've really highlighted the sort of, I suppose, less tangible aspects of that someone can bring to the table. You really highlighted that communication is absolutely key. And I suppose that's even more key when there's been hybrid working. Because if you're used to working in an office together, you've probably got a mechanism for communicating with each other as well as the other stakeholders. But that becomes a little bit more different when everyone's on sort of Teams, or some of the people are in the office, some are on at home. And then you also mentioned translating tech. So really that sort of explaining element, which tech people can sometimes, as we all know, sort of have those skills, but not be any very good at communicating that. So it's that translation piece that you've highlighted that's really key.
Yeah, I suppose another thing that I missed there is the empathy as well. You've got to be empathetic, so and we did do this a lot before COVID. So, our service desk engineers actually used to go on site a lot. So they would go into the wards and understand the stresses and strains that those clinicians are experiencing on a day-to-day basis as well. So, and especially the service desk, you can sometimes get individuals that call up and are irate because of, they're trying to see a patient or whatever that is. So you need to kind of talk that person down before you can actually get on to kind of resolve that problem. But if you kind of take that, personally, and also retaliate with that, it doesn't take you anywhere. You've got to be able to get that person, calm them down, and be able to, take them through that journey to resolve that incident. So if you've got that empathy in terms of understanding that difficulty that they're going through, that can help in terms of you doing that job. So, I'm banging on about this, but yeah, the softer skills I really do think are massively, massively important.
Absolutely. And I think, it's about sort of being able to convey that in an interview is probably then, something that we'll talk about in a moment. Jaki, if I can come to you next. So what should tech contractors be doing right now to improve their chances of winning NHS contracts in a competitive marketplace?
I think fundamentally your CV, it's always got to be your CV. Have a comprehensive CV built. But actually, you're selling yourself as a product when you're a contractor. So I think it's looking at what is trending in the market. Go and have a look at the long-term plan. How does your skill set match to that long-term plan? If you want to go and implement an EPR and be part of an EPR team, understand it. What is an EPR? Understand the fundamentals to that. And then make sure that if you've got that skill set, list it. If you need to be able to, communicate, as Steve said, to a wide variety of people, make sure you list that as well. The amount of people that don't say they're empathetic or they're a good communicator, etc., etc. But if you've not got the skill, go get it. You know, when I started in the NHS years ago, I went backwards to go forwards. So I took a lesser role so that I could gain that skill set. And I think it's, in terms of contracts and things like that, as a contractor, your reputation precedes you. And, you know, you've got to be very careful that you don't set yourself up for a fall as well. So make sure your skill set, you're capable of doing it. If you're not, ask for help. You know, I don't think anybody that you recruit has got every element of what you need, but never be afraid of asking for help, because we'd rather support you to get it right than have anybody crumble. I think it goes back to what Steve said, is in terms of supporting people and, you know, having that communication. If you don't know the answer, just ask. But if you don't know the answer of anything and your CV, you're trying to drive that forward, you might put on there that you've not got a particular skill set, but that doesn't mean to say you're a bad candidate, because you might have 90% of what we're looking for, but you actually own the piece that you don't know you've got, but you're willing to be trained up on it, you know. So I just think there's an element of, you don't have to be all of everything to get the job, but you do have to understand what is the job you're going for as well, and make sure your CV's tailored to it.
And would you do you think that in an interview setting, it's important? This question is to both of you actually. Do you think that in an interview setting, it's important to highlight that, or do you think people are sort of omitting what they don't know?
I think people will probably omit it because they think it goes against them. But actually, you might already have a team player that is in post and has that 10% that you're missing, but you've already got 90%, because we put out job descriptions and objectives and all the rest of it, and that's a broad brush. You know, at any given time when you're recruiting somebody, you're trying to get that, you know, 90% fit. You're never going to get 100%. And actually they may sway it in terms of their sheer enthusiasm and honesty, because you know then that they'll fit within your team and the rest of it can be trained. I think there is a thing where we're not training contractors, but having done contracting for so long, the amount of training I've obtained on the job, not necessarily, you know, structured, paid for training, but just learning from other people who've got skills I've not got, it is immense. So, you know, you will always pick that up.
Yeah. And what do you think to that point, Steve?
Yeah, I mean, Jaki said the word that I was going to use was be honest. So, you know, if you're going into an interview and saying you can do something and then you can't, that will come back to bite you. So, and that's when, and you know, like Jaki said before, the thing is, the contractor market within the NHS it's quite a tight knit within the organisation. So as people go from one organisation to another, which does happen quite a lot, you often see the people on that kind of NHS roundabout, but those organisations talk. So if you're going somewhere and not being truthful about something, that will follow you around. So, and the thing is, it is a supportive organisation, the NHS. So Jaki says, if there is something that you're lacking in, be honest about it, and then we can kind of help in terms of, you know, that's it. You're not expecting someone to hit the ground running. That would be great, but there is a lot of learning on the job as well. But if you've come in and said you can do X, Y, and Z, and you can't, you know, you're not going to last very long in that job. So it is honesty from my perspective. And I, you know, as part of when we do recruit people, we don't just do it on a CV. We do get that person in. We have a chat with them as well. And I think you can gauge a lot from that interaction with somebody of how they are, how they're going to interact with you as well, if they're being honest. So that's always something that we've done, and it's always stood us in good stead, rather than kind of taking the CV on face value. I would much rather have an interaction with somebody to see if I feel personally that they are going to be a fit for that job. Yeah,
I think you've both made really good points, and I suppose reputation is absolutely key, isn't it? If you're going to be going from one contract to the next, you need to really build that positive reputation. Question for Steve next. What signals do you look out for when a contractor is on the job that say they're doing a good job?
Well, I think this is a bit of a two-way street in terms of when you first employing somebody with a particular contract, you've got to make sure that you're being very objective and directive in terms of what it is that you expect them to do. Because I've often seen it where people bring people in to do a job, but then they don't actually be very prescriptive in terms of the description of what they want them to do in that particular role. So someone can start in a position and not understand what it is they've got to do. So that is very key when you kind of first taking that person on, that you're explaining exactly what the requirement is from that individual. So when you're that descriptive at the beginning, you know what it is that you require from that kind of role. So you can, at the start of it, you can set kind of milestones, goals, depending on what that role is. So, I mean, from the technical perspective, we do have measurements. So if I think about something like the service desk, obviously we have KPIs within those particular staff. So we actually listen to their initial calls that they have with individuals. So that's in terms of like a kind of mentoring piece as well. And then we will, as they progress through that, we will actually pick a number of calls and we will listen to those calls and sit down with them and say, oh, you could have done X, Y, and Z a bit better, or this was a brilliant call. And then the other bits we have is we have, customer feedback as well. So there's actually customer feedback on that experience. And obviously that's not just about that individual, it's the whole kind of experience. So there's those bits that we have within the organisation. And then, if it's like a program or a project manager, obviously they've got to hit particular goals within that. But then in terms of that two-way street, it's also about, them being happy in terms of what they're doing as well. Again, I'll harp back to culture again, but I do think it's really important in terms of bringing the right people in and then picking up on that culture that you've got so that they know they're being supported, that they know that it's not they're just coming to do that job and there's no interaction with anybody else. So if you do that kind of two-way street, that individual comes in, feels part of the organisation. It's not just, because sometimes it can feel a bit arm's length if you're a contractor. Jaki's probably experienced this in her career as well, where she's gone into an organisation and it's, oh, they're just a contractor, they're not proper part of the organisation. But at the end of the day, to Joe Bloggs within the trust, they have no idea if that individual is a contractor or not. So they're, an extension of your organisation. So you want them to feel part of that organisation. So, I think my point with this is it's not just on that individual's toes, it's the organisation as well, that they've got to be transparent in terms of what they're expected to do in that role and that they're, guided, especially in that first kind of period. So, from a service desk perspective, we have quite an intensive training piece at the beginning. The individuals come in, it's like a 6-week hand-holding kind of training sessions that we have, so that when they get to the end of that 6 weeks, they should, in theory, know exactly what it is we expect of them out of that job, and they're not kind of thrown in at the deep end as well. So, it's kind of two-way things. So there are measurements that we've got in terms of whether we feel that they're doing the job. Also, it's also meeting with those individuals as well and talking through where they're up to. So it might be that they come in and initially are struggling with it, but you've got to give people the opportunity to kind of, mould into that role as well, because it is a complex beast, the NHS as well. And that's probably kind of the big difference between the private and the public sector is it is very complex, especially from a technical perspective. And that's the other bit as well. So we need to be seen to want to recruit people into the NHS. There is that kind of belief that the NHS is a bit of a dinosaur in terms of technology, but when you actually get there, it's not. Obviously, we don't have the same funding that the private sector has, but we are kind of on the front foot, the bleeding edge with a lot of other things, and we need to be there to be able to get people to want to come and work for the NHS as well. Sorry, I've kind of taken it off on a rough tangent there.
No, and because it really does actually nicely lead us on to the next question, which is what are the main differences between contracting in the private sector versus contracting in the NHS? Jaki, I'm going to frame that one to you now.
Just to jump back a little bit to what Steven's just said, and I think it's really apt when he said about moulding. I think one of the trickiest tasks that as a contractor you have to do is hit the ground running, because let's face it, there is a belief that you're paying contractors a higher rate so that they've got the experience and they can hit this ground running activity. I think sometimes we go into roles where the objectives are not fully laid out, or they're very different on day one when you get there.
Yeah.
Or sometimes, and I've been there myself, I've sort of said to the line manager a week into it, I'm still not clear what you want from me, because it's a broad brush. And so I think it's really okay to say that to somebody, to say, I haven't got clarity of what you want from me just yet, so can we have a sit down? I've been bold and done that, and that's the confidence I've got. But quite often when you recruit somebody, you're recruiting them off a JD or a set of bullet points, and the reality is that there's so many other intricacies when they hit the ground that you need them to plug into. Or you may say, I've got a program or a piece of work that's in trouble, I don't have all the answers, this is why we've brought you in, and we need to just point and shoot you in terms of go and speak to all these people. That can feel quite daunting to some people. But the reality is that's why we've brought them in, because Steve, myself, have not got the time to go and do that aspect of the role. So I think it is okay for contractors to come back and say, I get you brought me in on this, but you're asking me to do this. I just need a bit of clarity, because otherwise they go down that rabbit hole.
Yeah, and I suppose also just because maybe they've done that role in a different organisation, it might be an NHS organisation. Every NHS trust is going to have slightly different nuances as to what they expect or what their landscape is in each organisation. So you can't just sort of plug and play the same people. They need to be inducted and supported, because they've got to build relationships with different stakeholders.
And I guess, you know, your question regarding private sector versus NHS, every NHS organisation does it differently.
Yeah.
And it's nice to be able to talk to multiple NHS organisations to see if you can do some general work together in terms of bringing things together and working similarly. But again, you know, you've got an acute trust to a women's trust in Cheshire and Merseyside. You know, they work very differently. A children's trust works very differently. So there are nuances. I think the challenges of going private sector to public, I came from oil and gas, a liquid natural gas into the NHS, and the speed that oil and gas works is massively different than the NHS. There's very little red tape, there's lots of money to throw at it, and it's one of them, just get it done, but they are very focused as well of the outcomes of the aspect you've been brought in to do. I think the NHS, you know, I'm coming from it from a program point of view. Over the years, have got better at having outcome-based projects. I would say that there's a lot of longevity in projects that could be improved upon. I do think we sit around and we're not necessarily aiming for the stars when we do a project. Sometimes the benefits are missed, or, you know, the correct setting up of your teams is missed. So I would say that the recruiting of people is a fine art, to make sure you've got everybody at the get-go, and don't be afraid to ask for more money. You know, if you've not got a team in place because financially it's going to blow the budget, well, you're not going to achieve the program that you set out to do. So be realistic at the set out of, you know, even running a service desk, if you need 23 people and they're only giving you 19, you're not going to achieve the SLAs, you know. And it's that kind of aspect of, we sometimes in the NHS go into things that we're not fully prepared for and equipped for, and therefore we're doomed before we start. And don't get me wrong, I love turnaround programs, but quite often you're always saying you didn't have it there in the first instance. I think in the private sector, they do value setting up functionalities before you get going. So for me, having a fully equipped PMO team, business analyst, business change, it would be the norm in the private sector. In the NHS, it's getting there over the last 10, 12 years. It's getting there, but it didn't have it in the beginning. And now it's starting to see the value of, you know, doing the mapping of as is and to be, hand-holding, doing stakeholder engagement. I always say with the tech, we're not doing it to you, we're doing it with you in the NHS, because I can't enforce all of the aspects of an EPR or paper free onto people. They've got to be there for the journey with you, otherwise you don't get the buy-in. So that's probably some of my takes.
Yeah, I mean, I'd agree with Jackie. I think that the pace is a big one, especially in the NHS. There's so much governance and red tape with things that, you know, especially from a project and program perspective, things can take a lot longer to actually get in. But I mean, if we look at like the COVID years, a lot of that red tape was ripped up. And what we do need to do is try and cling on to some of that. And I think the main kind of thing about that was both clinically, digitally, corporately, we all had the same goals, which was to deliver care through COVID. So when everybody had that shared goal, the system just worked a lot better. Obviously, the system was under a lot of pressure at that point in time, and it still is now. But because everyone had that shared goal, I mean, if I think back that, you know, within the shared service of working, we were trying to get virtual consultations across the line, and it had been months in the making. You know, going through all that red tape, and I'm sure Jackie's experienced this, and all of a sudden COVID came along and we had it rolled out within about 3 weeks, just because it was a requirement and it was needed. Now, why could we not have done that before that? So, but I do think it was a lot based on the fact that we had that shared goal through the COVID period as well. So there's bits that we need to make sure that we kind of hold on to, and we don't fall back into those kind of, you know, the pace of things. But the other problem, I suppose, that you get with the NHS is that kind of scared of failure as well. So, you know, we bring projects and programs in and we try and make them work rather than think, okay, we've tried that up to a point, it's not going to work, let's park that and move on to something else. We sometimes try and shoehorn things in to get them to do what we want them to do, and it's not always the best way of doing it. But yeah, I mean, obviously it was a short time that I worked in the private sector compared to how long I've worked in the public sector. But yeah, I think, you know, people tend to want to work in the public sector to kind of try and make that difference. You know, that's, I know it sounds very cheesy, but that's a big kind of driver for myself, and the fact of, I feel that coming to work every day, I get a lot out of it. You know, I feel that my role, although not clinically facing, helps in terms of the clinicians and what they deliver on a day-to-day basis. And the other kind of real positive thing that's come about through COVID is digital is understood and appreciated a lot more than what it was, you know, before COVID, because they've been able to deliver a lot of their services digitally that they never could do before, you know, that virtual consultation, etc., which they didn't think would ever work, or would, you know, things like Teams, etc. We tried probably for about 2 years to get Skype into the organisation, and COVID came along, and again, within a week, everybody was
using everyone's on Teams.
Yeah, and then 3 weeks later, it's like, why are we not on Teams? It's like, we've just got Skype in, but, you know, you can't do. But that was, there's some really big benefits from a digital perspective that we've gained because of COVID, etc. We need to kind of progress and push that forward as well.
Yeah, I agree. The escalation of digital is just, you know, it was exponential over those last couple of years, wasn't it, as compared to maybe how long it took for things to sort of catch up in previous years. So actually what we're saying now is that digital is a really exciting place to be in the NHS right now. There's lots going on. There's, you mentioned the long-term plan, Jaki. Well, there's obviously mandates for ERP systems to be implemented. There's lots of updating of legacy systems. So actually, for contractors right now, it's a great place to be in the NHS, because they will be learning an awful lot within those sort of technical disciplines. What advice, Jaki, would you have for someone being a first-time contractor in the NHS?
Well, I have the best job. I love what I do, because no 2 days are the same. And I think, you know, having done what I've done for many years, I genuinely get up every day and still say I love my job. And that's a biggie for me.
Yeah.
And I work with some really varied and amazing people, and challenges as well. You know, I like Steve said, sometimes you're seen as a contractor. Less so now. I think I'm lucky that I've been seen as, you know, a businesswoman, a woman in tech, a woman in IT, and all that good stuff. But I think my reputation has got me where I've got as a person that gets in and gets it done. So to a newbie coming in, I would say be eager, be prepared to do anything. You know, even after all these years, I could still run a program, but I can go and put a Gantt chart together. I can still run a RAID log. I can, you know, but I also, you know, running programs and things like that, I understand the pressures. So if some of my team are struggling, I'm more than happy to roll my sleeves, or, you know, and go and do a presentation for them and things like that. But I would say to a new person, don't just hold yourself back on thinking, well, this is what I've been asked to do, that's what I'm going to do. Go and search for other things. If somebody's struggling, help them. Go and offer to support them. If you're good at what you do and you've got some time on your hands, don't just sit there. Go and find something else to do. I do get in trouble because I go squirreling around going, oh, I can pick up that and I can do that. And, you know, it's nice to do that. It's not painful to say to somebody, you know, go back and do your job, because they might have a really good skill set to pick up something you don't know about and they've not told you about, but all of a sudden they shine. And I would say I don't dampen anybody's enthusiasm to that. So if somebody's good at something I've not yet seen, tell us about it. You know, let us learn from you. You might be new to the organization, but you might have a really good skill set I don't have. And I learn every single day. I keep learning of everybody that comes in. And I would say I work a lot across the NHS, and people come to me every day for referrals. And I do send people's names left, right, and centre, but it's people I value as well. So your reputation as a contractor is your utmost tool. Because if you've, like Steve said, if you've not got a good reputation, NHS organisations will talk, and very soon you'll stop getting them contracts. Whereas, you know, I've been very, very lucky in what I do, and fortunate to have some really good colleagues, friends in the NHS that value me and value my skill set, and also about value my opinion. So if I say Joe Bloggs is good at what they do, they value that. But it is a case of don't clock watch, you know, be there early, be there late, you know, not so giving up your life, but just be enthusiastic, because there's a long career in contracting in the NHS. And like Steve said, some really exciting projects. I was doing paper free at the Royal Liverpool 10 years ago, and we're still doing it, but it's not the same as it was. So yeah, it's you will have a varied career in the NHS.
I think what you've said again is around that sort of reputation, how powerful that reputation is. It's got to be A1, hasn't it, to be able to sort of continue to be a contractor and go to the different organisations.
Yeah.
We've now got some questions from the audience. So one question from Twitter is, what would you say are the major benefits to contracting versus permanent tech work? Either of you can answer that question.
For me, the benefit for me contracting was I enjoy a challenge, and I've done a lot of turnarounds. I think if I'd have stayed in a permanent job, you know, going there Monday to Friday, 9 to 5, I think I would lose my, you know, my sparkle per se. Whereas, you know, I do go in and have a joke with masses of people, and doing contracting I meet masses of people. But I also have been able to, and you could do this in substantive world, I've been able to change a lot as well. You know, people have come to me and said, have you got any jobs going? I'm new to the market. And I'm like, I haven't got anything at minute, but if you want to come and volunteer with me, you can see how we do it, you know. And then if you want to do that, and then you can say, oh, I do understand how they work now. And invariably, when we were back at the Royal, we did do a number of volunteers who were qualified PMs, but I didn't have the jobs for them. And actually, when my vacancies came out, it was them that we went back and hired, and they've gone on to work in NHS England and everything now. So I've built apprentice schemes with new staff. You can do all of that in substantive world, but I think I tend to go in doing a 3-month contract, and I've been there for like 3 years or 8 years or 5 years, you know, so it's fun like that, but there are so many variations to what I've done. You know, I can go in an organization and start doing paper free, end up doing EPRs, and actually I'm still there, but it's changed. But
so it's the variation, would you say?
Yeah.
The variation and the challenge each time.
Yeah.
It's the flexibility, isn't it? I think that's the big one of being a contractor, isn't it? That, you know, you can work somewhere for a couple of weeks and think, oh, this isn't for me, I can go somewhere else. Obviously, I wouldn't advise you keep dropping after 2 weeks, but you can at least, you've got that flexibility in there, haven't you? And sometimes, you know, it's an opportunity that you can kind of learn things on the job a bit more as well. So, you know, if there's a post that we've gone out for and we're not quite sure with it, you can get a contractor in and they can kind of help you mold what that role is. So, you know, it's an opportunity for additional learning as well. But I would say the big one in terms of contracting has got to be that flexibility, hasn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. Another question from Twitter is, outside of my CV, working with a recruiter or posting on LinkedIn, how would you suggest I market myself effectively as a contractor?
It's a difficult one, that, I think, because I've always gone to people like yourselves. I work with tons of agencies nationally. I would say get to know your agent as well. You know, Bernie and I chat practically every week. I chat with Bernie's team every week. They know the type of people I'm looking for as a recruiter, but also you know the type of roles I would go for. You know, if a role came across your desk, you instinctively know that is or isn't for Jaki. So I would get to know your recruiters. LinkedIn, I think, is a good place, but I think it's become a bit saturated of just general posts. It's another social media platform. If you've got people within the NHS, you know, like me or like Steve, it's about reaching out saying, can I come and spend a day, walk a mile in somebody's shoes, come and have coffee with you, understand how it works, you know, jobs board, NHS jobs boards and things like that. And then social media is a big one. You know, you're talking on Twitter now, but the amount of trusts that recruit via social media to say that they're starting some big EPR programs at the minute. I know for a fact in Cheshire Merseyside, they went out on social media, you know, so it's jumping on board of that. If you're with a recruiter at the minute, you might not be with the right recruiters. So look at the broad spectrum of that. So that's probably what I would suggest. Link in with people like Steve, myself, Bernie, because our cohort of colleagues will help you with that as well.
Yeah, I completely agree.
It is, like Jaki says, it's getting in with all those recruiting companies. That is a big one. I mean, historically, the NHS isn't very good at that recruiting piece. So we do have to rely on the likes of, you know, your company, Bernadette, as well, to bring people in. So, you know, for permanent jobs, a lot of emphasis is put on the NHS jobs website, which is probably the most outdated way of applying for a job I've ever seen in my life. So that tends to put people off right at that first, you know, stage, and spend 4 hours filling a form in. So it's things like, and that, you know, that's something that we've got to change internally. So it should just be the idea of submitting a CV, and then, like you do with most industries. But yeah, it drives me around the bend that that's the kind of processes in place for that. But yeah, in terms of the contracting kind of piece, that has got to be through those recruiters. It's good to find out the kind of recruiting companies that are used across the NHS, and, you know, getting on those books, and then getting those, you know, the people managing those accounts in their ears on a daily basis to get your CVs in front of other people. So it's being persuasive, isn't it, and persistent.
And I'm going to reiterate the point again, it's about reputation, because if we hear, as recruiters, if we hear from people in your positions that someone's good, that's music to our ears, because we need almost your endorsement that we're not there day to day, but Jaki will know how someone's worked. Steve, you would know how someone's worked. So if you're prepared to endorse that person because they've got a good reputation, because they've done a good job for you, that's when they're going to be able to find another post quite readily rather than be on the marketplace for a while. So this reputation has been a thread right the way through this session, but it's kind of fundamental, isn't it? It really is the core of it all.
Yeah, it's true. I mean, only last week, a colleague across Cheshire and Merseyside rang me where they were interviewing for a particular post, and some individual put their name forward and rang me and asked my opinion of that individual before the interview. So it does happen, and they worked here, about 5-6 years ago. But I still remember that individual and still gave my honest opinion. So it does. It's we have probably banged on about it a lot today, haven't we? But it is key.
But it's absolutely key, and therefore references can be given either informally or formally, and they're both valuable. But sometimes it can be a call to a friend, can't it, to sort of do a little bit of a checking situation, and that can be equally as powerful as a formal written reference. I'm just going to ask the last question from the audience. For someone moving into the NHS from the private sector, what skills or experiences should I be highlighting that will stand me out from the crowd?
That's a good one. I would say it depends on the role you're going for. So for me in the program world is, we all talk about Prince, agile working, methodologies, things like that. I'm less fussed about your qualification per se, but more about your experience. So if I was looking at somebody's CV and they may not be qualified as a project manager, but they've done project support for 4 years and they understand, how to pull meetings together, what is a RAID log and things like that. Everybody has to start somewhere. And I would say, if you understand the terminologies, and again, going back to what I said about the volunteering work, is, reach out to somebody to say, can I come and have a chat with you? You don't have to be interviewed by them. Within the NHS, they do a lot of cross-trust mentoring as well. Don't be afraid to contact somebody who's in the NHS to say, I've found your name on LinkedIn. I'd like to try and join the NHS. Would you be willing to have a coffee over team with me? The NHS is quite giving like that, and people will give up the time. So I know that, only yesterday I was contacted by somebody to see if I will have a virtual coffee with them, and they've gone on holiday, and I've said, as soon as you're back, give me a shout and I'll do that, because they've recently qualified and then they just want some hints and tips. So, and I do it all the time with people, because I think, I've been given a lot of breaks in my career, and why not give back to that? And I think, like we've said before, previous, all the way through this, is everybody has to start somewhere, and the NHS is quite a generous beast with the people that are in it, because they do give back, not just to the patients and to the service, but bringing new blood in as well. We are desperate for staff, good staff, to come and really give it their all within the NHS, who are passionate about it. And so therefore, if somebody really wants to get in and give up the private sector, we would all give up our time to support them people. So
I think that's really good for people to know.
Yeah, reach out, reach out to us.
Would you say the same thing for your organisation, Steve?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, when we tend to go out for adverts, I think we'll always have an individual on that kind of advert, as well as somebody to get in touch with. And I would always emphasise massively to, like Jaki says, speak to that person. Always stand you in good stead in terms of that interview, because you tend to then pick up what that individual wants more, because it's very kind of binary, isn't it, when you're looking at a job advert in terms of what the requirements is. It just tends to be very high level, and it doesn't actually give you the full detail. But if you've had a conversation with that individual, you kind of know already what it is that's required. So in terms of your prep before that session, you've already kind of thought about what it is. You've got a bit of information about the organisation, what they've got on from a workload perspective. So all things like that, it shows that you're willing to go that, that you've got that passion for the job already. You're willing to go, above and beyond, and you haven't just turned up for an interview and, don't know anything about it. So I suppose research is probably what I'm saying, really. Spend a bit of time thinking about that organisation. And then again, I would emphasise, and obviously my personal view is those kind of softer skills. but also is the experiences like Jaki talked about before. What people sometimes I've seen in interviews will come to a job interview and might have had a lot of information in the CV, but they think I'm not going to talk about any of those bits because it's in the CV. But until you start talking about something, that's when you bring it to life. Where again, if it's just black and white, you don't get the full picture. So I would just say, make sure people talk about themselves and their experiences, bring them to life in that kind of interview with that individual as well, rather than just thinking, oh, I've got that in the CV and they'll understand what I'm talking about. They probably don't. So it is given a bit more kind of real live lived examples and talking through all of those bits, and that really helps. You know, I've seen it when we've interviewed people internally for jobs as well, where they don't go into all the details because they think, oh, I've worked with you for 5 years, you know, already, but you still want them to expand and give those reasons why you know they're fit for purpose of that particular role. So yeah, I suppose in a way you've got to be a bit narcissistic in that interview and talk a bit about yourself and why you can deliver that role. And I wouldn't recommend being narcissistic all the time, but maybe when you're in that kind of interview space, because it is a funny setup. I mean, really, where we are now, 2022, and the best thing we've come up with in interviews, there's got to be some better way of kind of understanding whether somebody's fit for purpose in a job and kind of, you know, getting their skill sets. But, you know, we still haven't kind of got there with it, have we yet? But yeah, hopefully one day there'll be a better way. Psychometric testing, I don't know, whatever that may be, to try and kind of get to the bottom of whether people are fit for a role before they've actually started it.
Yeah, but good advice to explain that it's the communication, because you really emphasise that at the start of the session. Communication is key, and that's another sort of really valuable piece of advice. But I think knowing that the NHS is open to receiving CVs from people that are in the private sector, open to maybe giving a bit of insight into what it means to work in the NHS, I think that's really valuable for anyone who's looking for a move, and to know that they would be welcomed, because it might seem like an organisation that's only interested in bringing people through that are already in. But Jaki's made the point, everyone's got to start somewhere, and sometimes that experience of different sectors is also really valuable. We're out of time, guys, so I just want to say a big thank you for sharing your opinions, your insight, and you know, giving us that knowledge that you've shared with us today. I really appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thanks ever so much.